Hi, I'm Nick Armstrong, and this is Dear Fort Collins. It's a podcast to discuss issues in and around Fort Collins, featuring experts from the city and the county and elected officials. Our goal is to help make you a more informed neighbor of Fort Collins. In particular, this series of the podcast, we are interviewing city council candidates and Poudre School District Board candidates as well. Now, I ran for city council in 2021, and I know how hard it was to connect with every single neighbor and spread the word about what my campaign stood for and why I was wanting to run. I wanted to give each of our candidates the opportunity to connect with you in a medium where you might be comfy on the couch or you might be driving in your car, but able to listen on your own time and get to know a little bit more about these candidates and why they're running and what they stand for so that you can make a more informed choice as a voter. Now, I do serve on the Parks and Rec Board for the City of Fort Collins, as well as the Box Elder Sanitation Board and my neighborhood HOA board. I'm not here in any of those capacities. I'm here as a private citizen, and my hope is that using this podcast, you can become a more informed voter and make a more informed choice when you go to the ballot. With that, let's bring in our candidate. And we're here with Kevin. Kevin, introduce yourself.
Thanks, Nick. My name is Kevin Havelda. First, I want to thank you again for having this podcast. I think it is amazing service. I think we live in an amazing place where we have a very informed electorate about these crucial local elections that are going on, and your role in that, I just can't thank you enough. So my name is Kevin Havelda. I'm running for PSD School Board Director, District B, although it's important to note that my name will be on the ballot for everyone living in PSD, so everyone can and hopefully will vote for me.
Kevin, why are you passionate about the Poudre School District, and what motivated you to run for school board?
My wife and I moved to Fort Collins specifically for the schools. I've been coming to Fort Collins for over a decade. My sisters lived here and we're very, very close. So for me, my conception of Colorado has always sort of been Fort Collins. My first job in Colorado actually landed me in Denver, and it landed me in Denver 4 months pre-pandemic. So the world shut down. My wife and I were both working. I was working 100-hour weeks. And we had a toddler trapped in our condo. And school was horrendous, as you can imagine. I'm sure it was for most people, but particularly so in Denver, where the schools aren't always great, especially the pre-K programs. They're expensive. It's hard to get into. I am a former teacher, so I place a huge value and a lot of priority in that pre-K education. So fast forward 2.5 years later, we made the huge leap to come up to Fort Collins. Again, for the school, we want our kid to go to Olander because that's where my sister's kids had gone. I was familiar with it. I knew it. I knew the area. And so we made that dream a reality. And I'm passionate about PSD because I have had the benefit of teaching in some other school systems. I was in the RSD, which is the Recovery School District in New Orleans post-Katrina. And so that was what they call the Great Experiment. So I've taken some things from each place I've lived. I am an avid biker. And one of the biggest things for me was living in a community that is literally a platinum biking city for so many reasons. And I've been biking up here for a long, long time. Even before I moved here, I lived here. So my love of education and my love of biking had a happy matrimony this past year when my kid went to his neighborhood school and he learned how to ride his bike just in time for the start of school. And so dad and son got to bike separately together and drop him off at his school. And that was a dream realized. And I know it is for a lot of our parents because we all bike together. We have like a biking club that goes in, and it's just, that to me that's a paradigm of civilization in my view. And I say this genuinely, Fort Collins is by far the best place I've ever lived, and I will die here. And we wanted to raise our kids here because the schools are so incredible. The community is so wonderful for so many reasons. And so when I was asked to run, it seemed like a natural extension of what I'd been doing. I had taught for 4 years in some challenging places and learned a lot of great lessons and really value our educators here. I have a master's in education. I went to law school after that, but still had my toe in education policy. And so now that my kid is in the school system that we chose very intentionally, I view it as a stewardship, and I have a vested interest in maintaining, the strength of our schools, highlighting all the wonderful things they're doing while also challenging them to be better. And that's what I think I can bring to the table.
Can you share a specific issue or project you'd like to tackle if you're elected?
Well, I don't think I'm going to get to choose if elected. The one front and center in everyone's minds. I know you've been following it. And this was actually in Mayor Jenny's podcast. And it's funny that was a precursor to this interview. That was just a week. That was a week ago. It's been an absolute whirlwind of a week because my kid's school at Olander was one of the schools that was this subject to this massive consolidation effort. And so I have been very much boots on the ground. I went to an Olander based community parent meeting with all the affected schools. It was at Olander this past Sunday. I was asked to speak, which I wasn't, super prepared for. I was just there to listen. I did the walkout with Polaris and their students and their families. And I wanted to, my nieces go to that school. So that affects me as an uncle. And then the crescendo of the community meeting on Tuesday night was something that relit my faith in democracy. And I know it sounds trite, but it's so true because I've been so on the sidelines for so many years because the national rhetoric is just so nasty and it's so messy. And I know you ran in 2021, so you're in the throngs of all that as well. So what I found in this process is that the community building and the local organizing, it was overwhelming to see in my community promote student voices and teacher voices and parent voices so quickly and so intelligently and so respectfully. And, those are the people that I want to work with. And so whether I like it or not, if elected, the decision that they made was to postpone this big decision by a few months. I actually had an audience with Superintendent Kingsley on Monday. He was meeting with all the candidates one-on-one. And so one of the things I had shared with him was some of the things I'd shared at the parent meeting in Olander. And this is, not a unique idea or an original one, but just one that kind of show you how this is playing out, is that we need a steering committee. We need vested people at each of these schools to have a seat at the table, not in the audience, where they need to be front drivers. And I'm not an expert of Centennial. I'm not an expert of Olander. There are people that are. And if we're going to do this right, we're going to do this well, we absolutely need them at the table, informing, advising, and to be a part of that decision. So long-winded answer for your question of what's something I want to tackle. I think kind of destiny decides what the issues are going to be. And I think this one, our quote unquote October surprise, as Ali says, is it's this consolidation and these bigger forces at play with declining enrollment and declining birth rates across the board and the economy doing what it's doing. And so how are we going to do that while still maintaining the soul of our schools? And so I don't have a silver bullet, and I've been very candid about this. I think anyone that says they do is probably lying. I don't think there is one obvious or easy solution. Otherwise it would have been explored already. But I do think the process matters. And so if elected, my goal and my focus will be to bring in the voices that need to be amplified, and especially some of our more vulnerable students and pockets in our society. They deserve a voice at the table as well. And so I look forward to working with them to make this a reality.
Kevin, what makes you uniquely qualified to represent your part of the district?
I spoke this a little bit. That's a tough question. And I just had an interview with the Coloradoan, and I'll say the same thing, is that this is my first time running for public office. And Nick, I don't know if you have this similar perspective, but I heard some of this in Mayor Jenny's answer, and it really resonated with me, which was, at first I questioned whether I was the right person for the job. It's such a huge job. It's a massively important job. And as someone that gets excited about education, and will talk to anyone until they're blue in the face about education policy and what it means, because it runs deep with all of us. What makes me uniquely qualified for the position is that I think first and foremost is my passion for it. And that my first job out of college, I decided I want to do something that I believed in more than, something that made sense financially or whatever. And, I'm privileged to be in that spot, but it runs deep with me. And so I have an incredible experience. I've been blessed with an experience to see some really wonderful and horrific things play out in the course of my education career. And so I think I'm uniquely suited because this board position to me does feel like a natural extension of some of the experiences that I've had. I've been a teacher. I've been inside a classroom, which is something that I would want in a board director. So when you're making a big top-down decision about curriculum change or things like that, how's that actually going to work for a teacher's life that's already working 15-hour days and things like that? But on top of that, I've also have a master's in education. So I've studied it. I've studied to try to get better and to understand the different pedagogies and the different approaches to solving different problems for different kinds of kids. And then, I've also had my toe in education policy work. I was I was in Kentucky at a very interesting time in its history when they were contemplating its first charter school legislation. Having been a charter school educator and being a traditional public school educator, I know that that's a really tough needle to thread, and you can get it really wrong if you're doing it, on a whim and you're not doing it for the right reasons. So I helped draft a memo statement that was circulated to the General Assembly in Kentucky about the constitutionality and some of the things that Kentucky should think about. And I know they read it, and there was some of that stuff was brought out in that legislation. So I also have that experience of seeing big, sweeping, huge things, and seeing how the different interests play out, and some of it's not a simple thing, and you have to work collaboratively and with humility. And then last and finally, I'm a parent. I'm a parent of a kid that goes to school here. Again, I've got skin in the game. I've got a vested interest in the outcome of my own son's and daughter's educational trajectory, but so too all those kids in their class that may not have the same kind of parent advocacy that my household happens to have. So long-winded way. And the reason I bring Mayor Jenny and invoke her name with some humility is that I think she said it right, is that I think I would be I know I'd be a good board member, but it wasn't obvious to me at first. And so I think what's humbling in this process, Nick, and I'd be interested in your thoughts, is that I realized after the first couple of weeks that running this campaign had very little to do with me. It had very little to do with me at all, which is an amazing realization to come to in this process, is that I would oscillate between terror and, am I doing this? I've got a really busy professional life, really busy personal life. This is a horrible personal time for me to do this, but that's public service, right? And what she said resonated with me, which was, your campaign ends up having very little to do with you as an individual. I get emails from people that I don't even know, that are strangers, that are thoughtful and respectful and saying, thank you for running, thank you for stepping up for our kids and things like that. And I get really overwhelmed and really emotional hearing those kind of things, because you realize that, again, I have very little to do with it at the end of the day. I'm a name on a yard sign, which is a bizarre feeling, but yeah, so I think that's, again, another long-winded answer. You're probably gonna have to edit. But that what makes me uniquely qualified is that I do think I tend to represent a big swath of voices in our community that are thinking about things the right way for our kids.
My experience was a lot the same, in that you have a lot of different ways to serve, and the best you can do is just hope that you've represented yourself well. And that's one of the reasons that we have this podcast.
Yeah.
Kevin, who do you consider a role model in the realm of public service, and what do you learn from them?
I thought deeply about this too. And again, the listeners are going to make judgment choices about who I say, but I'll start. I read Profiles in Courage when I was in college, and some of the names of people that stood up for things that they knew were going to sabotage their own political careers, et cetera. So, that's not lost on me. I don't want to single out any single person, but I say that sort of conception of what public service really means. There's a guy that I interned for named Ben Chandler, who was one of the lone Democrats in Kentucky's congressional house. So he was in the 6th, which is it's Lexington. So it's very similar to a composite of Fort Collins in a lot of ways. But I remember when I was interning for him on the Hill when I was in college, there was one story that really resonates, and I hope he's not listening because he may not like this, but I think it shed a very good light on him. He had a meeting, a 9:00 meeting with a constituent's daughter who had just won an art competition for the entirety of the 6th district. And so that her art, she was a 6th grader, obviously non-voter, was going to be hung in the hallway going between the congressional buildings and the Capitol. And it's a huge, if you've been there, I'm sure you've been there. It's a huge, long stretch. And so you have all these art projects. So he had a 9:00 with her and her mother. These people probably had the least amount of power or clouts, for his, campaigns and things like that. His 9:30 was the wife of another congressman in Kentucky who represented the other side of the aisle, that was a very important interest group in Kentucky. And again, trying to be good not to name names. So I was tasked with being in the front office. And so that person came in 15 minutes early, and she said, please let the congressman know that we're here. And I said, absolutely. So I knocked on his door, said, I'm so sorry to interrupt, Congressman, but your 9:30 is here. They're a little early. And he said, okay, great. I'm not done with my 9:00. Just make them comfortable and I'll be with them. I said, okay, great. 9:25 rolls around. Can you go remind him that we're here? Yes, absolutely. 9:25, knock on the door. 9:30, 9:35, 9:45. They're getting angry now. And so I'm the heat of all this. And I go back in his office. I say, and he said, Kevin, I really respect you trying to be patient through all this, but you tell them I will come out personally when I'm ready for them. And I said, okay. And it may not have been the most savvy thing to do politically, but he placed a focus on being present for the person that was there in his office. And he told me later that that was going to be that moment for that family. And her mother didn't speak English. And so that moment for that family was more important to him than it was to sort of mollify this thing. So Ben Chandler, if you're listening, you're a semi-hero of mine for so many reasons. I think in the public, the national conversation right now, I really, really like Pete Buttigieg. I'm going to be unabashed about that. I think his approach to problem solving, his thoughtfulness and his eloquence. I remember dropping my kid off in school when he first ran for president. I didn't know who he was. And I heard someone talking on NPR, and I sat in the parking lot for 15 minutes just to hear this person speak about these issues so compassionately and genuinely and authentically. And I just thought, I miss that. I miss that sort of way to engage in political rhetoric. And so he's a role model for me now, I think.
If you could have any superpower to help your community, what would it be?
Nick, are you familiar with a concept called the veil of ignorance?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm a Superman guy. I know your background. And so I thought about Venom. I thought about all the comics that I loved growing up. And I thought, so I'm going to do something slightly different, and that my superpower, the veil of ignorance, for those who don't know, is especially in the education sense. Tomorrow, you're going to be born into a world where you don't know your skin color, you don't know your gender identity, you don't know your zip code, your socioeconomic status, anything. Now, design an education system where everyone has an equitable chance of success. Now, we know that's not the American system now. So my superpower would be, I wish I could create the veil of ignorance and know and see behind that blanket about every decision that we're going to make in the boardroom and every decision we're going to make for PSD, and know exactly how it's going to affect every single community, regardless of their circumstances. That would be my very nerdy superpower, is to peer beyond the veil of ignorance. Superpower.
Kevin, what's one piece of advice that you received but you didn't take and you wish that you had?
We started talking about this in the beginning of this. I got into this race fairly late in the quote unquote political calendar, so to speak. So I've actually received a fusillade of advice from anybody that will give it to me. And it's typically not how I operate. I'm very much a thoughtful, methodical, critical thinking kind of person. But I think because this is so new to me, I've received every piece of advice. The one piece of advice, and I think Melanie said this too, but that one resonated with me as well, which is, don't be afraid to be your authentic self. There's no such thing as like the candidate voice or this or that. And I think early on, I didn't take that advice. And as this campaign's gone on, I think just because the hours are getting longer and I'm just not clever enough to outthink myself, I've just kind of relied on my own voice and just been authentic to what I believe and how I would approach things. And so I'm taking that advice now. I don't think I took it at the very onset, just because I was nervous and, it was the first time and political candidate neophyte, even though I'd worked on campaigns before. So I'm glad. I think I did finally. I feel like I'm taking it now, but I didn't take it early on. I wish that would have just settled the nerves a lot more, just to be myself.
Kevin, where can we learn more about you and your campaign? And is there anything else you'd like to let the audience know about yourself?
So first, very important, and things like this, I hope every single registered voter in Fort Collins is listening to this podcast and all the podcasts about everybody. I love it. So where to learn more about me? We do have a website. I'm going to shout out my wonderful wife, Allison Havelda. She helped me put this thing together. So it's Kevin4PSD.com. And that's not the numeric 4 like some of the other candidates. It's actually spelled out 4. So that's my website. I also have a campaign Facebook page, Kevin Havelda for PSD. So if you basically Google Havelda, we think we figured it out to where that you should land on my website. That's a good point of entry. And what I'd suggest, and this is I took a note from Mayor Jenny's playbook. My email for this campaign is kevinhavelda4psd@gmail.com. Email me. I will meet anyone for beer, for coffee, for anything to talk education policy. I will talk and listen, more importantly, until I'm blue in the face, because I think it's just so important. So if you're curious about me or where I align on certain things, please have a conversation with me. Come to some of our events. Anything that I can do to get in front of you and listen to what is going on, what you think is important, and what you think a board director should be caring about. That's sort of how to get in touch with me. Now, last thing I want you to know, which is It's interesting the amount, we have a highly educated electorate. A lot of people don't know how school board races work. I'm running for District B, which is a very specific geographic portion of our community, which I'm not going to explain to you via podcast because I've tried to do this. I just have charts now. When I go to my campaign events, I have like a map. I'm like, this is B because it goes here and snakes around. Because I'm representing B does not mean that you don't get to vote for me if you don't live in B. It's a general election. So you get to vote for all the school board candidates who are up regardless of where you live, so long as you're a registered PSD voter. Google, and you can vote for me, and I really hope that you do.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you're enjoying this series of learning more about your candidates. It's so important just to get out there and vote, but to do so from a place of knowing who you're voting for and why you're voting for them, it's a really comforting thing. I'm Nick Armstrong, and I can't wait to see you next time.